الوطن هو حب وانتماء قبل أن يكون أوراق ومواثيق تثبت هذا الانتماء. الانتماء للوطن هذه القيمة الكبيرة التي تربطنا بوطننا، هذا الشعور بالانتساب والانتماء معنويا والارتباط ببلدنا وحبه والتفاني لأجله لأعلى الدرجات. كيف يمكن قياس هذا الانتماء؟ وكيف يمكن معرفة حب الوطن؟ فأهم شيء للتعبير عن الانتماء هو الإحساس الداخلي الذي لا يستطيع لأحد أن يساومنا عليه.
Where the state has certain responsibilities towards its citizens and the citizens have certain rights.
ولا يحق لأحد مهما على شأنه أن ينتزع منا هذا الانتماء وهذا الحب، وخاصة أننا ولدنا وولد هو معنا.
هم لا يملكون أي جنسية أخرى، وأنا منهم وشقيقي كذلك منهم، فقط نحن نملك الجنسية البحرينية ومولودين في البحرين من أبوين بحرينيين.
كل من سعيد عبد النبي محمد الشهابي، إبراهيم غلوم حسين كريمي، جعفر أحمد جاسم الحسابي، علي حسن مشيمة، عبد الرؤوف عبد الله أحمد الشايب، موسى عبد علي أحمد، عباس عبد العزيز ناصر عمران، محمد محمود جعفر الخراز، قاسم بدر محمد هاشم، حسين أمير أكبر صادق، سيد محمد علي عبد الرضا الموسوي، عبد الهادي عبد الرسول أحمد خلف، علوي سيد علي شرف، حسين عبد الشهيد عباس حبيل، حسين ميرزا عبد الباقي، خالد حميد منصور سند، كمال أحمد علي كمال، غلام خير الله محمد محمدي، محمد إبراهيم حسين علي فتحي، سيد عبد النبي عبد الرضا إبراهيم الموسوي، تيمور عبد الله جمعة كريمي، محمد رضا مرتضى علي عابد، حبيب درويش موسى غلوم، إبراهيم غلوم عبد الوهاب عباس، مريم السيد إبراهيم حسين رضا، عبد الأمير عبد الرضا إبراهيم الموسوي، إبراهيم خليل درويش غلوم، إسماعيل خليل درويش غلوم، عدنان أحمد علي كمال، جواد فيروز غلوم فيروز، وجلال فيروز غلوم فيروز. هذا وسوف يقوم وزير الداخلية باتخاذ الإجراءات اللازمة لتنفيذ ذلك في ضوء التزام المملكة بالحفاظ على الأمن الوطني وتماشيا مع التزام مملكة البحرين بالاتفاقيات الدولية، وعلى الأخص الإعلان العالمي لحقوق الإنسان والعهد الدولي للحقوق المدنية والسياسية ولكل من لديه.
Bahrain is a signatory to the international the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Bahrain is a signature to the Arab Charter on Human Rights. It's a signature to the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And so Bahrain is a signatory and must adhere to these very important international treaties and covenants. And so yes, there is a responsibility on the behalf of the government to adhere to those principles, absolutely. Each state that signs or becomes a party agrees to adhere to those principles. But you and I both know that states oftentimes do not do that. They simply fail to adhere to those same principles that they signed up for.
لكل فرد الحق بالتمتع بجنسية ما، ولا يجوز حرمان شخص من جنسيته تعسفا. هذا ما ورد في المادة 15 من الإعلان العالمي لحقوق الإنسان الصادر عن الجمعية العمومية للأمم المتحدة لعام 1948. ولكن المجتمع الدولي ممثلا في دول دائمة العضوية في مجلس الأمن والدول العربية وهيئة الأمم المتحدة ومنظمة التعاون الإسلامي لم يطرف لها الجفن ولم تدفعها عقيدتها استنكارا أو تنديدا بإسقاط السلطة في البحرين الجنسية البحرينية عن 31 بحرينيا. سحب الجنسية هو موضوع حلقة اليوم من البحرين في نظرهم، مع ضيفنا زامران سامويل عضو لجنة حقوق الإنسان التابعة لنقابة المحامين في بريطانيا وويلز، والمنسق العام بين نقابة المحامين في بريطانيا وويلز ونقابة المحامين في الولايات المتحدة. أحييكم ولنبدأ معا حلقة اليوم. أهلا ومرحبا بك معنا في هذه الحلقة من البحرين في نظرهم. الجنسية ليست ملكا خاص، بل هي علاقة بين الشخص والأرض، ولا يحق لأحد طبعا انتزاعها عنوة، فالوطن حب وانتماء قبل أن يكون أوراق ومواثيق تؤكد هذا الحق. والحد الأدنى للمعايير الديمقراطية المعترف بها دوليا هو اعتراف الدولة بحق المواطنة. تحت هذا الإطار وعندما نتحدث عن وطن ومواطنة، ماذا نعني وماذا نقصد بكلمة جنسية؟
So it's important to understand there is no universal definition of citizenship or nationality under public international law. Broadly speaking, the terms are used interchangeably. However, most people understand and most states understand these terms to express a social contract between a state and its citizens, where the state has certain responsibilities towards its citizens and the citizens have certain rights arising from that social contract.
There's not an accepted, overarching, conclusive definition of nationality under international law. International law generally gives the responsibility for placing conditions and definitions of nationality to states. And so states, different states, have different interpretations of what the definition of nationality is. And that's consistent with international law dating back to the 1930 laws, the League of Nations laws, that really gave states overall responsibility in defining nationality within their own laws. But in doing so, states have a responsibility to be consistent with international principles. And I think that's a very important distinction to make. And so when you move to the question about, well, what conventions, what international conventions exist today that focus on nationality, the rights of nationality.
كيف تكون الجنسية حق مدني شرعي يكسبه ويتمتع به المواطن حسب الاتفاقيات الدولية؟
Whilst the idea of citizenship or nationality is protected as an idea in international law unfortunately doesn't really help us too much in respect of what duties a state has and to implement that right and how it should go about implementing that right. Quite purposefully, states are given a broad margin of appreciation and discretion in the way they implement their citizenship rights.
ما هي القوانين والمعاهدات الدولية التي حفظت حق المواطنة والجنسية؟
This idea of nationality or a right to nationality is protected under several international treaties ranging from the 1954 Treaty on Nationality, 1961 Treaty on the Reduction of Statelessness. We also have the United Nations Declaration, Universal Declaration on Human Rights, Article 15 of which prohibits arbitrary interference into right to nationality. It's also important to note that there's various regional instruments which also guarantee or protect this right, such as the American Convention on Human Rights and also the European Convention on Nationality. Both these regional treaties protect the idea of nationality and prohibit unnecessary or arbitrary interference with that right.
ما هي القوانين الدولية التي تجيز سحب الجنسية؟
Well, in respect of interference or withdrawal of that right, the emphasis, as I said in Article 15, is on the word arbitrary. It can't be done without a good reason, and some of the reasons that are sometimes cited as legitimate reasons are, for example, if somebody voluntarily wants to give up their citizenship, or it's been found that when they applied for their nationality originally, they did so with some misrepresentation or fraud. So these are the types of reasons that are sometimes given for a legitimate withdrawal, and as you can probably tell, they're very limited.
you start really with, I think, the most important one, and that's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because that's such an important legal codification in law. It's at a very high level called customary international law. And what it says is that everyone has a right to a nationality. Every single person has that right. And a state cannot arbitrarily deprive an individual of that right to a nationality. And you then have to ask, well, what does it mean that a state is arbitrarily depriving a citizen of this nationality? And that Universal Declaration also points to that. It gives us guidance, because it says if a state cannot in any way deprive a citizen of nationality based on religion, based on ethnicity, based on sex, or based on political opinion. And it specifically talks about that. And so for a state to take away citizenship because of the political opinion that it's expressed by that citizen, that would be prohibited under international law.
هل جميع الدول التي صادقت على المعاهدات الدولية ملزمة بتطبيق وتنفيذ أحكام هذه الاتفاقيات في دستورها المحلي؟
Well, in respect of implementation, the states are not required necessarily to implement things in a strict manner in respect of their constitutions. However, in respect of nationality, the United Nations Human Rights Council and the United Nations High Commission on Refugees does recommend that states pass national laws which make their legal systems compatible with the conventions relating to provisions relating to nationality. In particular, the United Nations Human Rights Council has released a guidance to parliamentarians of United Nations member states, and one of the recommendations in the guidance is that constitutions and national laws should be adapted in order to comply as squarely as possible with provisions which protect the right to nationality.
بحسب القانون هل يحق للدولة سحب الجنسية من مواطنيها هكذا يعني تعسفا من دون أن يكون هناك أي مستند قانوني أو حتى أي أمر قضائي يعني يجيز سحب الجنسية؟
The states do not have the right to withdraw nationality without due process, without the legal process being properly followed, and for that to be done in a transparent way so that they have notice of what's going to happen in advance, and afterwards there's a proper right to appeal. So unless that due process is already in place, a state cannot revoke nationality arbitrarily.
القرار أساساً يجب أن يكون واضحاً وجلياً على ماذا يستند. صحيح في مقدمة القرار في هناك استناد إلى قانون قديم جدا، قانون أيام الاستعمار، قانون الجنسية سنة 1963، ولكن عندما سن دستور حكومة إمارة البحرين في سنة 73 وحتى دستور مملكة البحرين في سنة 2002 تم تجاوز هذا القانون تماما جملة وتفصيلا. ولكن نقول بأن السلطة القضائية في كيفية تعاطيها مع هذا القرار لا تملك كل الاستقلالية، وحتى الآن كل القضايا السياسية عندما يتم إحالتها إلى السلطة القضائية يكون هناك هيمنة للسلطة التنفيذية على قرار السلطة القضائية. من هذا المنطلق كان الأولى على وزارة الداخلية أن تلتجئ للقضاء وأن تصدر القرار بعد حكم قضائي، وليس على الضحايا أن يلتجئوا إلى السلطة القضائية لكي يثبتوا براءتهم. على المدعي البينة، والمدعي هنا وزارة الداخلية عليها أن تقدم البينة، وليس على الضحايا ونحن علينا أن نلتجئ إلى السلطة القضائية. وأخيرا أقول في هناك حوادث كثيرة حصلت، وأنا كنت من ضمن الناس الذين قدموا شكاوي عديدة على مؤسسات الدولة في شأن التعذيب وفي شأن التعدي، ولكن لم ننصف من قبل السلطة القضائية، لأن الطرف المتهم في هذا الموضوع وزارات الدولة، والسلطة القضائية لا تنصف المواطن في مقابل وزارات الدولة.
لو سمحت لي يعني ضمن هذا الإطار، هل يجوز سحب جواز السفر من أي مواطن ومنعه من السفر والعودة إلى بلاده بموجب القانون؟
Well, there's several further problems that one can think of when someone is stopped from returning to their country of birth or to their nation state, it may affect the rights not only of that individual but also other people concerned. For example, the individual may have family back home, and in many cases children or wives will not be able to see somebody who's being stopped from returning to their home country. Most of the states have signed the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, including Bahrain, and one of the provisions which is contained in that covenant is the right to a family life. And I think one has to be very careful if you're stopping someone from returning to the country that they're originally from. There is a danger that you also violate the rights of their family members who can't see their husband or their partner or their father.
إذا ما انتقلنا معك للشأن البحريني، يعني مؤخرا تم سحب الجنسية من 31 معارضا بحرينيا تعسفا بسبب مطالبتهم بحقوق مشروعة، وكان هذا بناء على قرار وزارة الداخلية. يعني هل يجوز حسب القانون سحب الجنسية منهم ولهذا السبب تحديدا؟
On the face of it, the situation in Bahrain is very concerning because the nationality does seem to have been revoked completely arbitrarily. One can see that, for example, from the fact that many of the people whose nationality has been revoked did not know that this had happened, this judgment had been made until afterwards. Some of them found out through their relatives or through the media, and I think that's concerning because it does show that due process hasn't been followed. These people have not been charged under the criminal law, so on the face of it, it is an arbitrary decision.
تم سحب الجنسية على ما يبدو بقرار من وزارة الداخلية بطريقة غير قانونية، وكتب بآخر البيان الصادر يعني بأنه يجوز الطعن بهذا القرار، ولكن المراقبين يعني استنكروا الطعن لأنه سيكون بمثابة اعتراف بهذا القانون الذي هو أساسا غير معترف به. ما تعليقكم؟
Well, I think this again demonstrates just why this is such an arbitrary decision. It's not been taken for legal reasons. It's been taken on the face of it for political reasons, and it is concerning. The right to appeal is an important aspect of a right to a fair trial, and in this situation it seems that there isn't a proper fair right to be able to appeal against a decision made. So it is concerning from the aspect of international law, which does require due process to be properly followed.
قرار سحب الجنسية حقيقة كان مفاجئ للجميع، لأن هذا القرار بدون مقدمات، وتحديدا الأشخاص الذين اضطروا من هذا القرار لم يكونوا يتوقعون أن تبادر السلطة بهكذا إجراء قاسي. بطبيعة الحال القرار لا يوجد هناك لديه أي سند قانوني ولا دستوري. صحيح القرار مهيمن عليه القرار السياسي وليس مخالفة تؤدي إلى سحب هذا القرار. طبيعة الحال هذا الأمر مسلك من مسالك السلطة في تعاطيها مع المعارضين، وهذا الأمر تم تنفيذه في السبعينيات وفي الثمانينيات، ولكن عندما يدعي النظام بأنه نظام إصلاحي ويقدم على هذا القرار، حقيقة في هناك مفاجأة وعدم يعني قبول بهذا الأمر.
بهذا القرار تم استهداف شخصيات كبيرة، ومنها نواب سابقين ومحامي ونشطاء حقوق إنسان، ومنهم من هم أصلا يعني خارج البحرين منذ عشرات السنين، يعني في مخالفة صريحة وواضحة للمادة 15 من الإعلان العالمي لحقوق الإنسان. أمنستي انترناشونال أيضا اعتبرت أن هذا القرار هو سياسي بحت. كيف ترون أنتم هذا القرار؟
These people are not criminals. They haven't been charged under the criminal law. These are, as you say, lawyers, human rights activists and academics, people who need to be able to express their opinion without fear. And what's concerning is that on the face of it, they seem to have been penalized for showing a different political opinion. Bahrain has signed, as I said, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It requires everybody to be treated equally under the law. That's regardless of gender, sex, and also regardless of your political opinion. So it's a clear violation of Article 28 of the Covenant.
السلطة سلكت مسالك مختلفة لتقييد حرية النشطاء، فمن فبرك له قضية وهمية لكي يسجن، ومن فرض عليه أحكام قاسية لكي يظل في المعتقل، ومن شوهت سمعته من خلال اختلاق قضايا يعني مفتعلة لا أخلاقية. ومن ضمن الأمور بأن يتم إبعاد قسريا أو سحب الجنسية لعدد من المواطنين، ونحن منهم. أنا أتصور الموضوع له علاقة بوجودي في جمعية معارضة رئيسية لا زالت موجودة في البحرين وتكافح من أجل مطالب الناس، هي جمعية الوفاق، وبكوني نائب سابق من المعارضة ودوري كان رئيسي في فتح كثير من ملفات الفساد، إضافة إلى نشاطي على الساحة الداخلية في البحرين من خلال التفاعل مع مطالب الناس وتواجد معهم في كل الميادين والساحات. لا يوجد هناك أي دليل قطعي بأن يعني ممكن الاتهام يوصل إلى سحب الجنسية، ولكن أنا أتصور هو استهداف مباشر لنا. وأخيرا أقول جل من سحبت جنسياتهم شخصيات معروفة طبيعة الحال، ولكن في كثير منهم ليس لهم أي نشاط سياسي، فقط لأنهم يمكن من أصول فارسية وفصول إيرانية. وهذا يمكن يراد النظام بهذا الإجراء بأن يخوف شريحة كبيرة في المجتمع، مكون رئيسي موجود في مجتمع البحرين وهم بحرينيين آباء عن أجداد، فقط لكي يعزلونهم عن أي نشاط سياسي. ولكن في طبيعة الحال هالأساليب بدأت تكون قديمة وبالية لا تأثر في عزيمة الناس. وبالواضح القيادات المعارضة والشخصيات والنشطاء الاستهداف المباشر لأنهم لهم رأي مخالف، لديهم نشاط في الخارج تحديدا، ولكن يمكن يكون أحيانا تبريرهم بأن لديهم جنسيات أخرى غير الجنسية البحرينية.
But the question, the follow-up question to that is, because we've said that it's a fundamental right and states are not able to arbitrarily deprive citizens from that. What does arbitrarily deprive means? And that's a question that will always be debated, because a state might very well argue that it's not arbitrarily depriving a citizen of this right. But we know that international law is quite clear that if you are attempting to deprive the right of nationality because of an individual's ethnicity or the individual's political opinion, then that would violate international law and international standards. And so, and it's not just substantive protections, it's procedural protections. If a state wants to attempt to take away the nationality of an individual, that state has to follow due process of law. The state has to adhere to international principles giving the individual right to respond, to defend him or herself from the action of a state to take away the nationality. And so that I think is very, very important. But it comes down to the of whether a state is acting arbitrarily attempting to deprive the right of individuals. That's very important.
هناك كثير من المراقبين الدوليين ونشطاء حقوق الإنسان الذين ينتقدون الأمم المتحدة وخصوصا آليات المتابعة والرقابة. يعني بمعنى هناك قوانين واتفاقيات والدول توقع عليها ولكن دون أن تلتزم بها. فمثلا بالنسبة للبحرين لديها دستور وموقع على أغلب الاتفاقيات الدولية، لكن الديكتاتورية هي واقع الحياة على الأرض. يعني أليست الأمم المتحدة معنية بشرح هذا التناقض؟
I think the United Nations is in a difficult position on issues like this, where a broad margin of appreciation or discretion is given to member states on an issue such as this. The UN often wants to be seen to not interfere or reluctant to act. It is, in my view, only a tool that's as strong as the member states of the UN want it to be, and there hasn't always been the political will to encourage the UN to act on issues like this. So I think a lot of the emphasis should be on the member states who deal with Bahrain, who are friends of the Bahraini government, to ask difficult questions of the Bahraini government in respect of what's going on, not only in respect of nationality issue, but the wider political context of arbitrary detentions, claims of torture, and the wider political crackdown on demonstrations. Having said all that, the UN is concerned and has started to act on this issue. This week we've had Navi Pillay, the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights, who's expressed grave concern at the deteriorating human rights situation and political situation in Bahrain. We've also had Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations, who has asked for a team of 4 observers to go on a fact-finding mission to Bahrain, and the Bahraini government has invited them, so there is a dialogue that has begun and it does seem to be working. I think what's required now is for that pressure to be sustained and accelerated rather than to be left, and much of that will come down to the member states who have some clout in the region and who deal with Bahrain. I think it is concerning. It has its problems with democracy, and I think it can be alarming for those people who are there to think, well, why is the international community not doing more and not putting more pressure on the government in Bahrain? I think that's, again, ties in what I said earlier. It's important for those member states that have some clout or that have a good working relationship with Bahrain to use those strong ties to ask difficult questions of the regime, because the world should be concerned about what's going on. The Bar Human Rights Committee, which is the Human Rights Committee of lawyers in England and Wales, have for the last couple of years been having a dialogue with the government of Bahrain and have written a report based on a fact-finding mission making several recommendations. Those recommendations were raised in Parliament here in London, and as a result of that, concerns were expressed to the Foreign Ministry in Bahrain. Now, that's putting some pressure on and publicity that no doubt the Bahrainian government will want to avoid. And to my mind, what's needed is for that sort of pressure to be accelerated and sustained, particularly, as you say, with countries such as Britain, who do have strong links. We need to use those links to ask difficult questions when people are tortured, or there's allegations of torture, when there's crackdown on demonstrations, or when there's arbitrary detention. These are concerning issues that we should be worried about, not only from the point of view for someone in Bahrain, but in terms of the international community.
You can look at regional human rights conventions, the Arab Convention or Charter on Human Rights. Bahrain is a signatory to that charter. That charter says the same thing, that the right to nationality is a fundamental right, and a state cannot arbitrarily refuse or detain an individual from gaining that particular right. Mm-hmm. You can look at other conventions, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. That goes even farther, because that says that the right to a nationality is a fundamental human right. Yeah. And so because it's such a fundamental human right, a state cannot arbitrarily deprive a citizen of that right. Yeah. And Bahrain is a signatory, a party to that convention as well. And finally, there's the Convention on the elimination of racial discrimination, and that too deals with ethnicity, and there too a state cannot deprive an individual of his or her nationality simply based on ethnicity. So those are the international standards and conventions that exist that really set forth a fundamental right that every individual has a right to a nationality.
الآن عندما تقوم دولة مثل البحرين وقعت على اتفاقيات دولية بما يخص قانون الجنسية، ما هي التبعات برأيكم حسب القانون الدولي التي تترتب على الإخلال بهذه الاتفاقيات؟
Well, firstly, Bahrain is coming under increasing international criticism from the highest level, as I said, from Navi Pillay, who's the High Commissioner on Human Rights, and also Ban Ki-moon, who has agreed to send observers to the region. So there is criticism and consequences in that respect, but this can be taken further than that. As a result of the breach of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, these issues can be mentioned at the next session of the General Assembly. If the member states are concerned enough about this issue, which to my mind they should be, they can raise this issue at the General Assembly in September and have a resolution passed to be able to deal with that.
The state cannot arbitrarily take away the right of nationality. That is fundamental. And again, when we talk about arbitrarily depriving somebody, a citizen, of that, if a state attempted to justify its actions because it didn't agree with an individual's political opinion, or for some reason did not accept the ethnicity or the religious background of an individual, that would be an arbitrary decision by the state, and it would be in violation of international law. Now, these are not always easy to determine because the state will argue that it has the right to define who will be a citizen and who will not be a citizen. And in many ways, states are correct in that interpretation because citizenship is really it's a legal bond. It's a contract, if you will, between a citizen and the state. And it's bound by a reciprocal notion of rights and liabilities, and responsibilities. And so the citizen and the state come together to form this bond, this legal bond. And so each side has a responsibility. And so states often argue, well, the citizen is violating its own responsibility in this covenant, in this legal bond. For instance, if a citizen attempted to commit a terrorist act against the government, or high treason against the government, to overthrow the government, that could be a justification for the state to say, well, you've lost your right, for your right of nationality, your right of citizenship. But that's a very high bar to meet. The state has to be very careful about that, because oftentimes the state will use the political opinion of individuals or the freedom of expression as justification to take away nationality or citizenship.
بررت الداخلية قرار سحب الجنسية بأنه بسبب الإضرار بأمن الدولة. يعني من الذي يقرر أنهم أضروا بأمن الدولة؟ وما هو مفهوم الإضرار بأمن الدولة من وجهة نظركم؟
Well, there is on the face of it no threat to national security. These are people who are academics, they're human rights lawyers, they're concerned individuals. These are people who have simply expressed a political view which is different to that of the ruling regime, and they seem to have been penalised for it. They're not being charged for any criminal offence. So I think there's no threat to national security. One has to see this in the wider context of how the Bahrainian regime has been working. There are those who have been in a similar position to the 31 that we're talking about, and they've been given seminars in London, sometimes seminars in our parliament, and when they're flown back to Bahrain, they've been arrested for threatening the national security. Those people who have sat in on those seminars know that there was nothing of the sort said that would threaten the national security of Bahrain. So I think this is not an issue of national security, this is purely a political crackdown.
المفارقة هنا أنني اعتقلت في أيام ما سمي بالسلامة الوطنية، فكنت في المعتقل 3 أشهر و7 أيام، وتحديدا كنت لدى جهاز الأمن الوطني وتم تحقيق معي تحقيقا مطولا، ولكن في النهاية تهم وجهت لي كلها تهم جنح لا علاقة بحرية التعبير. وهنا إذا كان في هناك أي اتهام لي شخصيا بأنني يعني ممكن أتهم بالخيانة لا سمح الله وشابه ذلك، كان الأولى بأن أتهم في حينه. وكل القضايا المعروضة الآن في المحكمة واللي كانت على أساس صدر الحكم لا علاقة بحرية التعبير من تجمهر ومن التواصل مع وسائل الإعلام وشابه ذلك. لذلك المفارقة هنا بأن يأتي هذا القرار قبل يوم واحد من صدور الحكم عليه. صدر القرار بتاريخ 6 نوفمبر وصدر الحكم بتاريخ 7 نوفمبر، ولا يشمل أبدا أي سبب من أسباب المؤدية إلى إسقاط الجنسية.
If a state makes a decision to deprive an individual of his citizenship, of his nationality, the state can do that. There are circumstances where the state can absolutely do that, but they are restricted, and states that want to make that decision must do so consistent with international law, and must do so not in an arbitrary way. And if, in fact, if an individual was being deprived of his citizenship simply because of his own views, freedom of expression, political views, that would be against international law. But I do want to make it clear, the states, it gets back to this legal bond. States also have a right to define who is a national or citizen of their country and who's not. All states have that right. We do so here in the UK or in the United States, and international law gives states that right to do that. And so there are circumstances where an individual can lose his right to nationality, his citizenship. It happens. But for a state to make that happen, the state must meet very high standards before they make the decision to deprive an individual of his nationality. And it cannot be in an arbitrary way, substantively or procedurally, in legal terms. And that's what you're always trying to find out and balance what the facts are for each of these cases, and that's what you have to do. And I apologize because I don't know the facts on each of these cases, but it's very important that states provide the right of individuals before they're deprived of the nationality, before a passport is taken away, before citizenship is taken away. That individual has a right to be able to defend that or to counter the state's decision in an open, fair proceeding.
يعني الآن وبعدما تم سحب جنسية هؤلاء نحن نستطيع أن نقول بأننا أمام كارثة. يعني إذا ما قررت البحرين طرد هؤلاء الأشخاص من المملكة الخليجية، يعني نحن أمام كارثة إنسانية. بهذه الحالة ما هو دور المجتمع الدولي حيال هذا الأمر؟
Well, if people are expelled from their country of nationality, that's concerning on many levels, particularly for their family and also for those individuals who have to go elsewhere and essentially stateless. To my understanding, 16 of the 31 people don't have any other nationality, so they will be effectively stateless in that sort of situation. And there are things that the international community can do. There are conventions in place, the 1961 Convention, for example, on the reduction of statelessness, which encourages states to reduce the amount of people that are stateless by offering them a place to live, by offering them a home, by offering them a nation state to belong to, and for steps to be taken to make sure that no one is left without legal rights just because they're made stateless. It's a problem that you typically have after a conflict, and the conventions and most of the customary international law was designed to cater for that sort of a situation, but it would also deal more than adequately for a situation where someone has been deprived of their nationality arbitrarily for political reasons and then finds themselves stateless.
وحقيقة الذين في خارج البحرين يمكن أمورهم أيسر من الذين في داخل البحرين. نحن نقول أن أرض الله واسعة، وأهم شيء أن الإنسان لا يتخلى عن مبادئه. بالطبع الأمر قاسي جدا الذين سحبت جنسياتهم سواء كانوا في داخل البحرين أو خارج البحرين، لأن هذا يؤدي إلى بعض من القيود سواء في التنقل أو محاولة حصول على بعض الخدمات. نحن حتى الآن لا نعلم ما هو تداعيات هذا القرار.
In essence, they'll be stateless people. That's the worst situation that a citizen or an individual can be in. That's why it's so important. That's why international law focuses so much on the right of nationality, because every individual should have a nationality to a state, to at least one state. Of course, you're able to have nationalities to more than one state, but international law wants to ensure that you have nationality, a nationality to at least one state, and because that's so important, international law says to countries, you cannot arbitrarily take that right away from that individual because it's so fundamental. So when a country does that, and it places that individual in a position as a stateless person without a home, that's a very serious step for a state to make, and it's an indictment, I think, against the state if it's done arbitrarily. And this is, of course, the concern when a state makes that decision without due process, without ensuring that they're meeting international requirements under international law. That's the concern that people have.
هل هناك خطوات يمكن القيام بها حيال هذا الأمر؟
I'm not sure, out of the 16 people who are going to be effectively stateless, to my mind it's not clear where these people are. The people that are now in Bahrain, if they're expelled, where they're going to be sent to. But certainly the issue of reducing statelessness in people, to reduce the amount of stateless people, is something that's not only a matter of treaties, but it's also a matter of customary international law, which means that all states are obliged to follow this law. It's public international law that's relevant to everybody. So I do not know where these people will be sent to, but certainly it's something that should concern whichever country they're sent to. And to my mind, on the face of it, it's something that's done to take away the weight of what they say or their rights in Bahrain. The nationality is not just obviously about political rights, it is also about your identity that's beyond just legal norms or legal rules. And I think it's an attempt, again on the face of it, to demoralize people because identity is an issue that's not just a legal issue, but it's associated with where you think you come from, where you belong, beyond just the law.
هل يحق لهؤلاء رفع شكوى للمقرر الخاص للأمم المتحدة، وما الذي يمكن أن يقوم به المقرر الخاص في هذا الشأن؟
Under the United Nations, the Human Rights Council special procedures, the special rapporteur or the special representatives of the Secretary General can carry out independent reports for any human rights issue under a mandate from the Secretary General. Now, in this situation, the United Nations has, as I said before, already started to act, and there will be a team going from the United Nations to carry out observations. However, a special rapporteur could receive complaints from an individual or the individuals, and if it's decided that it's a legitimate complaint, that can be further investigated and recommendations can be made to the Human Rights Council based on that. So provisions are in place and a mechanism is in place for complaints to be made by individuals to the special representative.
حقيقة التغطية الإعلامية وكذلك مواقف المنظمات الحقوقية كانت يعني جيدة، ولو أن التحرك الدولي حتى الآن دون المستوى المطلوب. من المفترض على المجتمع الدولي أن يبادروا بمواقف حازمة تجاه السلطة في البحرين، لأن هذا مؤشر خطير بأن تقوم السلطة من طرف واحد وبدون أي مقدمات سحب الجنسية من أي مواطن، وهذا الأمر يضع بأن كل شعب البحرين يكون موضع معرض لسحب الجنسية بأي لحظة. وأعتقد حان الأوان للمجتمع الدولي أن يضع حدا لهذه الممارسات، وتحديدا البحرين موقعة على العهد الدولي وعلى كثير من المواثيق الحقوقية الدولية، فكيف تخالف هذه المواثيق من خلال هذه الممارسة؟ أنا أتصور هناك يعني دور رئيسي لمجلس حقوق الإنسان وكذلك مفوضية السامية والتي الآن تزور البحرين بأن يضعوا حدا لهذه الممارسة، وأن يرجعوا يفرضوا على النظام أن يرجع الجنسية للذين سحبت منهم. كيف
يمكن لهؤلاء أو ما هي الخطوات التي يمكن أن تتخذ لكي يتم استعادة الجنسية لهؤلاء الأشخاص؟
I think that first and foremost, this is on the face of it an arbitrary decision for the reasons I've said before, which are that they were not told beforehand that this was going to be this decision was going to be taken. They therefore did not have the chance to contest this decision. Some of the people found out through the media, which I think is quite telling, and they do not have a fair way to appeal. So I think this is most concerning, and the government of Bahrain should immediately revoke or rescind their decision to remove this nationality arbitrarily until the proper investigation can be made independently of why this decision was made in the first place. Mm-hmm. I think it's also worth remembering that this was not a decision taken by a court. Mm-hmm. This was a due process was not followed as it's required to be followed. This was a decision taken by a government minister, the Minister of Interior, and so all legal process seemed to have been shortcutted, and for those reasons I think the Bahrain government really needs to revoke this decision as soon as possible.
Other than raising the awareness and the profile of the 31 individuals, to be able to put some additional pressure on the government of Bahrain to at least justify the decisions they've made. There's not an international court, for instance, that these 31 individuals could go to. There are very limited steps that unfortunately that citizens who have been deprived of nationality can take, because as I said at the beginning of the interview, so much of the emphasis and the responsibility is on the state, and so the state ultimately has a great deal of latitude in determining who's a citizen and who is not a citizen, but they have to do so consistent with some of the international standards that I've spoken about. And if there's concern about whether or not the state has adhered to those principles, then I think it's important that the international community speak out and requests clarification and justification from the government of Bahrain on why it made a decision.
في حال ما رفضت الحكومة البحرينية إعادة الجنسية لهم، يعني برأيكم ما الذي سيحصل؟
I think in terms of implications of them not doing it, I think they are coming under growing international criticism. It's not a government that likes to be seen in a bad light. It will be bending over backwards to make sure that these concerns are minimized as much as possible. However, the world is paying attention. There's growing concern. That's reflected in what Ban Ki-moon said this week. That's reflected in the fact that the observers will be going there in the beginning of December to investigate what's happened, not only in respect of the nationality issue, but the growing human rights concerns over the last 4 years. Ban Ki-moon has urged the government of Bahrain to lift the ban on demonstrations, for example. Public demonstrations have been banned, and that's most concerning. And he's urged the government of Bahrain to put in place whatever steps possible to be able to allow people to demonstrate or protest freely. So I think in terms of the implications of them not doing it, I think it will simply add more pressure on them, because from the wider point of view, you have to give another reason to people to believe the Bahrainian government is behaving in the way it is for purely political reasons and simply doesn't like any type of dissent at all.
كلمات أخيرة.
We want the people in Bahrain to be able to protest freely about what's happened, to be able to express their opinion without being treated unfairly under the eyes of the law, it needs to be seen in light of what's happening in the rest of the region. People do not want to be told that you can only believe one thing. People want to be able to vote. It is not just a Western ideal. It is something that people everywhere want to embrace. And so my hope for the Bahraini people is that the rule of law will be respected. Not only the rule of law within Bahrain, because in many of these issues they're not even following their own laws, let alone international laws, but also for the wider community to show more of a concern in Bahrain, like perhaps that they've done elsewhere.
في نهاية اللقاء أشكرك جزيل الشكر على وجودك معنا. شكرا لك.
Thank you.
مشاهدينا الكرام، إلى هنا تنتهي حلقة اليوم من البحرين في نظرهم. طبتم وطابت أوقاتكم، أستودعكم الله على أمل اللقاء بكم في حلقة جديدة وضيف جديد. إلى اللقاء.